are together, which is amazing. In your beautiful studio, here today to talk to you guys about stronger blonding tips, tricks, and also business tips and tricks, right?
Yeah. Colin, first of all, I'm super excited to be here with you and to do this class together. It's been a minute since we've done a show together, so it's going to be awesome. Yeah, that's like Colin said, we're really looking at not only the techniques behind the blonding, which we've got a few techniques for you, but we're also going to look at the business of blonding, which I know for you, Colin, like you have so much brilliant information. Every time I talk to you, I think about the business in a different way. So we're actually combining those two together. And we're going to start off with one technique, and then we're going to expand from there and show you some different ways to not only, again, use more blonding, use more light during your services, but also then to exponentialize your business, because that means more money in your pocket.
Yeah, and for some reason, a lot of hairdressers are weird with money. This is our art, so we understand all that. But it's all about creating freedom in your life, whatever that is, whether that's a small amount, a bigger amount. I think what's amazing is that you can achieve anything you want in this industry just by working on it and setting some goals, and that's stuff that's really important to us. So
totally, and that's what I love about what we've created in this class is that we are going to actually be talking about dollars, and we're going to be looking at formulas and ways that you can look at your business. Like if your service dollars is X amount, how does your frequency of visit impacted? How is upgrades, take home, things like that? So it's going to be a little bit of a different format than I've done before. I probably do this all the time, but it's definitely going to be a really cool conversation. So before we jump in, one of the things that I always in this preparation, your leading question was like, what does blonde mean?
Yeah.
So talk to me. What do you mean when you say what does blonde mean?
Well, it's funny, and I learned a lot from you just planning this class together. So whether you guys, no matter what you do in this industry, there's something to be learned in this class. I feel like whether you're independently working, whether you work for somebody as a commission stylist, whether you own a salon, we really took into consideration different approaches here. But to me, the first question you want to ask your guest is, what does blonde mean? We do a lot of blonding services, right? It's the #1 service in our salon. We are constantly doing them, whether it's hand painting, balayaging, foil work, you name it, color correction, we're doing it. But the #1 question I always have to ask my guests is, what does blonde mean? Here's what that means to you guys. It's either a percentage question or a degree of lightness or darkness. So sometimes when a guest sits down, they say, I want to be blonde. That could mean they want to be heavily blonde, 80% blonde, right? Or it could mean they just want to be a brighter level of blonde. So you really want to start to establish what that means to the guest through the consultation. We both believe hugely in the consultation to get us started, connecting visually with your guests, asking them when they say blonde, what does that mean? Are you talking about the individual level of that blonde? Are you talking about wanting more blonde than you have now? Or a combination of the two is essential. So we'll get into that hands-in as well, and we're going to kind of roll through this. But that's the #1 question. Connect with your guests right out of the gate. What does blonde mean to them? Say this every class I've ever done. I'm not in the business of being right or wrong. I checked that box off a long time ago. I'm in the business of making my guests happy, and the #1 way to do that is through a strong and solid visual consultation of what blonde is.
Cool. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys an overview of what our kind of baseline technique is, and then Colin's actually going to jump over to another camera. He's going to go right now. And we're going to talk more about how we adapt the technique, and then also he and I are going to ping pong back and forth. I'll be doing the hands in, so you can pin that video if you really want to see the technique, or if you want to see Colin's hands and face, then you can pin Colin's video and you can watch him while we're talking. But he and I will be bouncing back and forth depending on whose hands are in. But there's two, and also our amazing behind the scenes production team, they'll also be swapping so that you can get the visuals. So when we talk a little bit about just kind of more detail of what we're talking about right now, we are essentially talking about 5 ways to build your blonding business, which consultation, Colin already brought up. We also have treatments, we have toning, we have take home, and then also pre-booking, which is one of the conversations I think, especially younger stylists, and sometimes even as a more seasoned stylist, we get a little bit lazy with the pre-booking. And so we're going to talk about how all of those things affect your business as we roll through all these techniques. So what I'm going to start off with you guys is this beautiful Sunfix technique one of the conversations we had as we were preparing this class for you is that not every guest wants to be super bright blonde. And some of your guests, in fact, like not everyone wants that halo of brightness. Some people call it the money piece. That's not necessarily every single guest every time. When we find ourselves getting into the habit of like doing that just kind of without even thinking. Again, we see the Pinterest photos, and I love that collage that was created because you see that there's lots of variations of blonde. So one of the questions I would ask my guests when I'm looking at photos is point to the photo, point to where on the photo you love the hair. And usually it's like, could be a strand that's like a percentage, like you said, an amount of lightness, or it's like they want to be close to level 7 or an 8 or a 10, depending, right? So this is my baseline technique in the salon for a guest that's like maybe a haircut guest for a lot of years, and you decide to introduce some color to them. So what it does is it softens the hairline, so there's not really a lot of lightness around the hairline, but they do have this beautiful kind of just overall Sunfix technique. And then from here, I have the option, and I'll talk to you guys through this, I have the option to adapt. So if they do want more of that like halo of brightness around the face, I can pop that in. If they want a little bit of hand painting, which you'll see with Colin later, then we can do that as well. Or if they want to be able to pull their hair back, not really see that they have highlights, but have the dimension lights down, we can do that as well. That's actually a reality, especially for our brunette guests. Not everyone wants the thing that we always go towards. So I'm going to be talking to you about that a little bit. Or a lot in the next few minutes. So the thing about that technique is, and the reason I love it in the salon is it's actually about 15 to 20 foils. So this is what our mannequin looks like with the foils in. We're using really strong placement and effect, so strong diagonals to move around the head shape, as well as utilizing the round of the head. So we're actually, it's like balayage, which Colin's going to talk about, but it's about understanding over direction to really maximize the fall of lightness on the head. So I'm going to jump right into that technique and show you guys what we can do. I'm also actually really excited because while our pre-done is on a smoother girl, I actually want to show you this on a curly mannequin because this is a technique that can be adapted on curly hair or on smooth hair. So however the guest wears their hair, you absolutely can utilize this technique. The first thing I'm going to do is actually take a halo off the top. We're going to address this later. So it's a standard horseshoe section. And I've already detangled her, which is why she's a little fluffy. And that is just going to get clipped away. And we're going to address that later. One of the things about coloring hair, and again, this is for whether you have been doing hair for 10 minutes or 10 years or 30 years, whatever that is, sometimes these little reminders about technique actually can be a huge game changer and make you more efficient in the salon. We know that in the salon, time is money. So the other thing, when you're sectioning, I always section top down. And then I like to create a roadmap. Some people will just drop down one section and just go for it. I actually like to really create a roadmap for myself because then I can work quickly, I can work really efficiently. I also, in the salon, I can really put my attention on my guest. I don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, what's my next section? How do I move? I can maintain that conversation, which to be honest is a lot of the reason that our guests come into us, right? Because they want to chat with us, they love our personalities, as well as the beautiful hair that we do. Okay, so basically what I've done here is I took a horizontal section from ear to ear across this back. So that's where I start the section. And I really am just going to put in about 3 foils here. Remember that me utilizing strong diagonals is going to be so key. So I'm going to be coming from the top of that section almost to the nape on the bottom left of that section. And I'll come in a little closer so you guys can see what's happening here. So again, it's coming all the way from the top, almost all the way to the other side of the head. And this is really, the reason this works is because I'm utilizing the head shape and that hair is going to travel. So just like with hand painting, for those of you that aren't familiar, this actually blew my mind when we launched Skylight and I started to really dig into hand painting. This blew my mind. So what's happening is this section, it's kind of tricky to see. Let me pop the foil under so you can see. But what happens is with this over direction, this hair that lives all the way over here is getting over directed to the middle. This hair that lives over here is getting over directed to the middle. But what's going to happen is when that hair goes to its natural fall, it all kind of splits and divides, and that's why it starts to look like these really beautiful, soft, lived-in, sun-kissed highlights. So it's utilizing placement and effects to the maximum to make you really, really efficient. So I'm gonna get started. Basically, these sections are gonna just crisscross right in front of each other. Sometimes, depending on their size of their head, you're gonna do maybe 2 foils, maybe 3. If they have a smaller head, you might only be able to pop in 2 foils. It really depends. So the other thing too that I do in my placement is I make sure to load my brush with enough product so that I can do less brush strokes and be more efficient with my saturation. So I unload that mid strand, and then I can come in, turn my brush a little slightly vertical, and just feather that in. So this technique is for that guest that wants something that's like definitely more lived in. We're utilizing slices, which is a bold placement, but we're utilizing that strong diagonal in order to create diffusion. We know that in placement effect, horizontal lines fall like, if you now pop it into the chat really quickly. So those horizontal lines are gonna fall like a wall of color, whereas those diagonal lines are definitely gonna give you more of that diffusion. Okay, so that's my first one. And then the second one is gonna intersect slightly horizontally with that. I'm coming up to the next corner of the head. So again, utilizing that strong diagonal. And then I'm gonna do the exact same thing. So Colin, while I'm not gonna spoil it, let's talk a little bit more about consultation. And let's talk about, like, at what point did you realize the value of consultation?
Well, when I was having consistent redos. So, I mean, it's funny. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make as professionals is that sometimes we don't dig deep enough into the consultation. We at John Paul Mitchell Systems, everybody that's probably on this Zoom class right now knows this if you're familiar with Paul Mitchell. We call it the heart of the servant, right? We want to make sure that our guests feel amazing, and we say yes to everything possible. So we've all been in that situation where that guest comes in with the expectation of the picture looking like this, and the reality of us only being able to get it here in the amount of time that we really have. But the biggest mistake I think a lot of us make is we say yes. Can you get me here? Sure. Next thing you know, you're working, right? You got everything mixed up. They say, hey, by the way, it's 1 o'clock. Can I get out of here by 3? I have to pick my kid up. And we're like, sure. We say yes to everything. And then what happens the next day? The guest calls up and says, hey, my hair's not as light as the picture. Next thing you know, we're redoing it. And the only mistake we really made was we didn't manage the guest's expectation versus the reality of the time that we have to do their hair. So one of the things I've learned right out of the gate is, again, what does blonde mean to you? Here's what I can do in 1 visit. Here's what I can do in 2. Here's what I can do in 3. And I think one of the things I've learned as well, it's really, really important to make sure that we are under promising and over delivering. Really play it cautious when you're talking about blondes. You really want to make sure that the guest that you're working with really has realistic expectations that can be done in the time frame and the amount of time that we have. So it is so, so important to communicate properly. Anyone who's seen me do a class, you know this, the definition of a frustration is an expectation unmet. So when guests are frustrated with how their color looks or what they thought was going to happen versus what happened, it just meant we didn't effectively communicate enough, visually or physically or connecting verbally. We didn't do enough to make sure that the guest really understands what's possible in a day. I think sometimes that's the biggest mistake we make. And a lot of redos we have are really second visits that should have been paid for, third visits that should have been paid for. So for me, again, if the guest sits down in my chair, they show me a blonde that I feel like is realistic for them in 2 or 3 visits, my verbiage switches right away. I say, hey, no problem. I think we can get you here today. That would be 1 visit. If you have time restraints, I wouldn't recommend doing any more. If the hair isn't super healthy, I wouldn't recommend doing any more. Or sometimes I'll say to the guest, hey, I can get you to the picture you want. That's going to be 3 visits. I can do all 3 today. I'm going to have to work you in between guests. Of course, I'm going to charge you for all 3 visits. And you'll see how drastically their expectations change versus not having that conversation. So that's a really important thing to go off of. I know you have some other amazing consultative tips that aren't the same as that? And I know you want to share them as well today, Paul.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you make a really good point about so often we have our guests come in and they want to go from like a level 1 to a level 10 in one visit. And we, like you said, break our backs to create these results for the guests, but we don't take into account the fact that, like, for example, one, you are here with Colin and I today, learning a technique that's going to maximize your skill set behind the chair, make you more efficient. That has a value attached to it. And so while it might only take you 3 hours now to do a technique that when you were first wearing a hairdresser took you 12 hours, right? That has a value added. And so I love, Colin, that you made that point of making sure that you really, that you manage the expectations, but you also charge what you're worth. Because that's the thing, like when you look at the average pricing of a hairdresser, it generally accounts for things like improper consultations and also not charging what we're actually worth. And if we were all willing to do that, we'd all make a lot more money. I think we'd be a little happier. Okay, let me show you guys really quickly. So I popped those few foils in. I came to that second section that I took. The trick with this technique is you actually want to drop out the hairline. And it's just like maybe a half of an inch to an inch, depending on their density. And then what you're doing is, again, just like we did in that bottom, you're taking really strong diagonals that are slightly, like I would say, more horizontal diagonal back. And you guys can see that diagonal line there. Maybe you can see it. So that continues all the way to the center back of the head. So I'm going to show you again this technique. So again, this is a really this is baseline ground zero, 15 to 20 foils to give that guest an effect that looks super lightened overall. So again, I'm going to take a really strong horizontal diagonal back. It's slightly vertical, but I don't want you to think vertical, because otherwise, how does vertical fall? We all know strands and bands, right? So being aware of that, like that diagonal crossing the head sheet, I can be a little bit more dramatic, and I want to talk to you guys about this. So pardon me if a lot of you are very great with the head. You're really familiar with the head shape, but what I would say is you'll notice here as you move towards the back of the head shape changes dynamically in terms of curvature, right? So what I'm doing with this technique and this placement is I'm utilizing the curvature of the head. It's doing the work for me. So I can take a really strong section, I can pop a slice in, and I can be safe and comfortable knowing that I'm going to have a beautiful result because the head shape is changing. So as I come through here, and I'm going to show you guys this one more time, even though I showed you on the bottom. So basically, if this hair is all foiling, again, just so you can see what's happening. Do like this so you guys get the visual. But basically, if I pop this in, right? So all this hair comes to the center here to get painted or to get foiled in that slice. But what's actually happening is it's traveling a lot. So if that hair gets combed down to its natural fall, you can see how it becomes really wispy and there's not a lot of density here. That's why, and again, forgive me if I'm continuing to hit this point, but I will tell you guys, like, once you get this, you will be so dangerous behind the chair and you'll be so fast and so efficient and so just really excited to be able to get in. You won't be back praying to the color gods, hoping that your placement comes out the way it's supposed to. And someone I just saw in the chat asked, where can I get the head sheet for this placement? I have it. We'll make sure we can, I don't know, do they get a replay? We'll pop it up. If you send me a DM at the Paula Peralta, I'll make sure you get it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, so I mean, what's really cool too, this is an amazing technique, 15 to 20 foils. This is another part of being a great colorist, the ability to say yes. The ability to make time for services when the guest wants them. It's techniques like this. And another thing that's really, really important, I always do this to my guests, the next visit after this guest comes back is important. How are you happy? And we talked about the degree of lightness in a blonde. Again, the level. The guest says, I want to be blonde. Does that mean you want to be a level 10 with 20% blonde? Or does it mean you want to be a level 8 with 40% blonde? It's very specific, whether we're talking about the lightness or the actual volume or amount. One of the things I love to tell my guests, if they are more of a virgin guest, having natural hair, I kind of take my hand I stick it over top of their head and I show them the first time I'm going to do your hair, you're going to highlight. The next time you come in, that's going to get some overlap, right? So you can show them some overlap. That's going to allow them to understand that they're going to increasingly get more blonde every single time that we highlight their hair. We cannot grab the exact little blonde bits back out and put those exact bits in. So that will increase the percentage. So what you do with that guest, you want to say, do you want to go a little lighter? I liked it exactly the way it was last time. Well, then you guys know that you're going to be using this similar placement, almost exactly the same placement, doing your best to keep it on track, but you're probably going to have to low light or paint between the foils. And that's going to bring us to our next topic as we start to really look into evolving the guest. Once the guest is done, they love their hair. What happens when they want to be lighter? What happens if they say, listen, I love this look. I want to, have this kind of percentage of blonde. We're noticing what Paul did, but I also want my edges a little bit lighter. I want to have a balayage. A lot of times too, guests, which I think is exciting, are very into hair color right now. I remember when I used to have to explain things to everybody and what was trending, what was happening. Now guests come in with their phones, they sit, they show you, I want this. It has a name you never heard before. And it's actually an accurate name that other people are using. You had no idea what this technique was. You've been doing it for 20 years. You didn't know it's called this. A lot of guests want to try things. They want to experience things. They want to be on trend. So you oftentimes too have guests whose hair doesn't support a certain blonding technique, but you still want to be able to deliver them the look that they want. Example being balayage. A lot of finer haired guests don't have the texture to support a balayage, but they still want to experience that. So we'll show you guys how to evolve these things, how to combine techniques, and how to get your pricing to the next level as well. Again, it's all about that expertise that you're providing. Again, what level they want to be, what percent they want to be, and how you can creatively fit that into the time frame that you're working with, I think is what makes a great colorist.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you bring up that thing, because the other thing the thing about time and their frequency of visit, because the other thing we don't bring up as well is the guest budget. So often Paul let off talking about, like, sometimes hairdressers get weird about money, but for me, that's the first conversation I have. I ask my guests when they want to be blonde. I'm like, okay, cool. So how often do you want to see me? Like, how often are you willing to come in? And my second question is, what's your budget right now? And what's your budget long-term? Because what happens is a lot of times a guest will come in and say, hey, I only have $300 to spend, or I don't know, $100, right? Depending on where you're at, $85, right? So, which is the number that we play with. And what you want to do is you have to actually educate the guest. So like Colin said, guests are coming in more educated than ever in terms of like balayage and placements and money pieces and all the things that they're asking for, but they don't actually get sometimes the work that's required in order to create these results. So it's actually our job to educate them, just like we are today. We're dedicating ourselves to education. We do have to do that same thing with our guests to make sure that they understand exactly what is required, because a guest may not get that, okay, so overall, if I take you from black to blonde today, that's whatever the price is, right? It may be a $500 service, it may be, right? It's the frequency of visit. So whatever that number is, you want to be aware of the guest, like, what's your number? So if that guest comes into you 4 times, that's the cost in one day to get them from brown into that platinum world that they're trying to live in. So I think it's like really being willing to break it down and have that conversation with the guest. So I started on the other side. I'm on the last foil of that left side, using those strong diagonals again. Let me just show you this last bit here. And you can see where these foils are starting to intersect with the foils that came from the other side. We pop that right into place and go from there. So Colin, how do you handle that like awkward kind of budget conversation with the guests? Like, is there like tips, tricks? How do you handle that in the consultation?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to not make it awkward. I think that's it sounds silly, but I always ask people, hey, is there a specific budget that you have for your hair today? But again, when you understand what their expectation is, and you understand what your reality is, once you break down the process, then they'll be the ones that usually say, well, wait, how much would that cost? You know, for example, yeah, I can do this picture. You know, you're here, you want to get here. That's going to be about 3 visits. Each visit's about $250. So I could do the full $750 visit today, or we could just start back and do the $250. You know, if they say, hey, $250 is too much, you know, that starts before they even get into your salon. So hopefully you guys are doing FaceTime consultations at this point. Hopefully you're connecting with new guests prior to them arriving to your business. Hopefully you have some sort of strategy when either you're booking your own appointments, or if you have someone at the front desk booking you, where you're asking them, you know, have you checked out our prices? Are you familiar with the artist that you selected and with how they charge? Those are all conversations that you want to have up front, again, because you want to make sure that the guest is comfortable spending money. A big mistake that a lot of us make as hairdressers, and I thought this was amazing, and Paula's going to dig deeper into this when we start talking about leveling up. You know, this is basically what your first blonding service looks like. It's a few foils, it's a guest that's pumped, they're excited to be there. They usually see a pretty drastic result from when they came in. As long as you nail the tonality of the blonde they're looking for, they're pretty good to go. But once we start to look at evolving these blondes and start to say, yeah, this is the service you want, this is the time frame you're giving me, here's some ways that I can make you blonder, but really try to shrink the amount of time, but still charge for that service. These are all things that we have to start to get better at as artists. And I think through COVID, a lot of us were woken up to that harsh reality of, wow, this isn't just my hobby, this really is my career. My livelihood depends on this. My family's livelihood, my future, my dreams, my goals, they're all tied into this. So I have to be a really effective business person to be able to maintain the level and quality of life I want. That's what really the goal would be here. But Paula really opened me up to something I'm not very good at, which is take home and retail and all these things. But the one mistake a lot of us make when we had that conversation was, as artists, we don't value what we do as much, believe it or not, as our clients do. You know, I basically get my hair cut for free from my friends and family. I get my hair colored for free in between guests when I don't have anybody, whatever it is. We're kind of cramming in. We don't pay as much for products. We kind of are all on professional discount that we receive and purchase products on. So for us, it's not as glamorous or as exciting as it is to a guest. So I really want you to put yourself into the guest's shoes. They're coming to see an expert. They're excited to see you. They're excited to spend money on us. They don't do this professionally. They don't live this every single day like we do. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to be really, really successful on different terms as a hairdresser. Paula opened my eyes up to something I'm going to share with you in a little bit, but what if you could turn every guest into 2 highlights with 1 visit, only doing the 1 highlight? And how do we do that? Well, we do that with take home, something that Paula is really, really good at. So increasing your ticket, and again, increasing that guest, you know, expectation level, but also letting them know, in order to do this, you're going to have to purchase and invest in these things. And I remember we did an old episode before we were doing Style Trip. We did a show called Style Tramps, and we visited a motorcycle machinist, and we handmade motorcycles and customized motorcycles for different riders. And one of the things I always ask them is, like, how do you start your consultation process? You know, when you're hand building a specific motorcycle for somebody, how do you know what they want to spend? How do you know? He said these could go anywhere to like 6-figure jobs if you really want to customize these bikes, all the way down to guys who want to spend $1,000. And the biggest thing that he said that he did was he basically told them, do you want it cheap, fast, or perfect? It's like, pick 2 out of 3. Because if it's cheap and fast, it's not going to be perfect. If it's perfect and cheap, it ain't going to be fast. I found that to be fascinating. And I love that little bit of tip that he had. Like, just level out your importance. For me, I'm going to ask my guests right out of the gate when I'm dealing with blonde, long, blonde, or healthy. Pick 2. Rank them in order. You know, if your beautiful, long, blonde hair being really, really healthy is what's most important to you, then maybe we don't want to push it to that level or volume of blonde that you think you may want. Have these conversations. You know, if they're telling you flat out, I just want to be blonde and I'm willing to cut a little shorter, then we can push a little bit more. but it's all about understanding what the guest really wants and being able to deliver that really in a great way. So these are all things that we're talking about today. Paula, what foils are you using? That's coming up.
Oh, these are they're the Framar Silver Embossed. They're the Precut Coils. I like the weight of them, and especially when I'm doing like a condensed foiling, having a little bit of a thicker foil, which I know traditionally hairdressers don't love, is really a game changer for me. Okay, so I just want to talk you guys through this. So basically, this top section, that portion that we created initially, I did it. I approached it the same way I approached the nape of the hair. So if you're just joining us, essentially I took these really strong diagonals across the head shape, and then they intersect with each other. So if you look here, this is foil 1, foil 2 comes this way and intersects with the center. Yeah, I love Karen, just like long blonde healthy. She loves that consultation. Change the lives over here. And then my next foil is going to intersect as well. As I continue up the head shape, they just almost like a zipper, right? So they just keep intersecting as you work up the head shape, utilizing the round of the head to diffuse the hair. If you guys are just joining us and you maybe joined us a little bit late, this is the initial baseline of the technique. So you can see with this technique, she looks like she has a full head of highlights. And this is only, actually, I think this was 18 foils. It's not even 20 foils. So when you look at it, you see all of that dimension popping through. And Colin's going to talk about this later, about how you utilize the depth in order to make your lightener look brighter. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But I want to show you this last piece here, this last section. So as you can see, this is the front of her head shape. We've popped these foils in, and now I'm working again, standing behind my section. So this last foil, you have a couple of options. And I'm actually going to turn her this way and tip her head down so you can see what I'm talking about. So what I've created in that zipper is I now have a triangle that goes all the way up to the hairline. So this is the hairline that I'm leaving out. Again, you have the option with this technique. You can hand paint it, you can foil it, you can do whatever you want. You can leave it. If your guest doesn't want to see the lightness around the face, you can totally leave that as well. What I like to do with this last one, because it does fall horizontal, or vertical, depending on where you're at on the head. So with this one, what I actually like to do is just give it a little bit of a weave, just to make sure I'm diffusing, so that if she does pull back, there isn't like a really strong line right there. And if you want to keep the strong slice, you can also do a tease, which will diffuse at the base. So again, remembering that this technique is a little bit softer, it's more lived in, it's for that low maintenance guest that doesn't want to see the base of their, doesn't want to see lightness at the base of their hair. You'll pop that foil on in there. In terms of products, I'm actually using dual purpose lightener and 10 volume developer. The reason I like to use 10 volume, especially on curly hair, remember this is my brunette guest, it's her first entrance into this world, so I definitely, like long blonde or healthy, I kind of do the same thing with curly hair. Like, do you want to keep your curl intact? Do you want to be like super, super blonde? Or do you want to compromise that in order to have more lightness, more brightness? It is possible to get light and bright and healthy. It just takes a little bit longer, which again, time is money. So I can use a lower volume developer, but that time and that expertise again has a value attached to it. Okay, so that is my full foil placement. So you can see again, yeah, can you give the formulation? Absolutely. So I'm utilizing currently dual purpose lightener and 10 volume. The mannequin that I prepped, I actually used Synchro Soft and 20 volume developer because I knew I could move through a little more quickly. And also I just love Synchro Soft, like the consistency of it, especially when I'm doing like a quick condensed foiling like this, it gives me a lot of control. So I love that. So that's the technique right there, all those foils. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and pop over. Colin's gonna come on over. We're gonna switch places. This is now that mannequin with these foils in, and he's going to utilize her. This is now becoming his hand painting model. So give us just 1 second as we shift here. Amazing. And we're gonna start talking about our next business tip too, which is the thing that I love. Colin and I talked about as our thing. It's the upside of being in a studio.
Yeah.
You're doing great, Colin.
Yeah, my feet are a little too big.
Amazing.
With the grace of a toddler.
You're doing great. Cool. All right, so we're gonna go ahead while Colin gets set up. We're gonna talk a little bit about take home and the value that can be added to your service. So when you look at take home, feel like, and I'm just gonna be like real talk from the beginning. I think I remember even being a future professional and not understanding the value of like selling shampoo and conditioner. It wasn't until I became a professional in the salon, and actually even as a future professional, as I moved on towards the end and I was getting more repeat guest traffic, I started to realize the value of the maintenance and how my guest maintenance at home actually affected what we were able to do in the salon. And so that really changed the conversation dynamically for me, where I started to actually see the results of things like treatments and see the results of my guests who I only see every maybe 4, 6 weeks, 8 weeks sometimes, and knowing what they're using on their hair when they're not seeing me. And so not only then does it become part of that conversation, part of that journey with the guests, it also becomes a massive opportunity for revenue. So I actually love this. Our friend Heather Kaanoy, who's the director of education, she like laid this out so brilliantly because her brain's amazing. And I actually love it because it's the perfect hairdresser visual of like how these kinds of things can help us. So what we're looking at here is, okay, so say you come in for this service that I just showed you, that foil placement, right? And we'll say it's an $85 service. You might be higher than that, you might be lower than that, but just for this process, this service, we're gonna say it's $85. So essentially, if you go start to finish with the completed service, it might take you 2 hours, right? We're just saying, again, averages, stay with us on this. So we're gonna say 2 to 3 hours, start to finish, guest comes in, consultation, application, they're out the door, okay? So what occurs is if you don't sell any take home, $85. You make that $85, that includes, product usage and overhead and all those things. What you do, if you sell that guest one shampoo, that's $20, we'll say, or it could be a conditioner, whatever, a take-home product, that's $20. What you've done after that, what do you make? Good. Okay. What you've done after that is you have increased your service from $85 now to $105, which is a 20% increase. That happens in 2 to 3 minutes, right? Whereas that initial service with your guest has maybe taken 2 to 3 hours. So you've increased in 20% just in a couple of minutes with really just one conversation about explaining your guests the value of take home. This is actually a conversation that I see Exodus Studio said absolutely. So again, when you look at this from, there's a couple of ways to look at this, and I'll keep going, but I want to show you guys the math here. So say that I have an $85 service, right? And I have $40 in take home. And again, we'll just say shampoo and conditioner here, but it could be shampoo, it could be conditioner, it could be styling products. So I again go from $85 to $125, which is a 45% increase. Now, if my guest has gone through this blonding journey, right? Whatever that looks like, whether it's 15 to 20 foils, whether it's 100 foils. I love that these bottles specifically are Paul Mitchell Blonde because they need, right? We've removed moisture from their hair. We've changed, like chemically, we've changed the structure of their hair. So we need to make sure we're putting back all of the things into their hair that we took out in that process. So this is like baseline minimum, okay? So $40 in product. And you could say, if the average bottle, maybe it's a $10 to $12, but still, what we're going for with $40 of take home, it's $125 in your service, which is a 45% increase. That's almost, you've almost gotten a 50% increase in 2 to 3 minutes after that service with your guests. The other thing too that Colin, we were talking about this and we were talking about our take home averages. And I was telling him that like, My average take home a lot of times runs somewhere around $150 to $300, depending on the guest service. And he was like, well, how? Well, the way that I do that is I actually sell a lot of tools to my guests. Like, it's a huge part of the conversations that we have. Is once my guest has gone through and they've invested all of this money into their service, they can't use drugstore, like cheap, hard metal tools on their hair anymore. Like, they need the express ion technology that things like our Paul Mitchell Pro Tools have. They may need those titanium plates, or they need Exodus Studio. You are my favorite hype person. I'm just telling you this right now. So and if you guys aren't watching the chat, they just said facts. That's all they said in there. So that's the thing though, is that so they need, you know, like the express ion technology, all of the stuff that Paul Mitchell invests in to make sure that we have great tools. Well, they're not only great tools, they help keep your hair great. That's why they're great. And so the thing about that is, if I add in a tool that's, okay, we'll say on average $105. So I now have gone from an $85 service to $190 in revenue, right? A service total plus that take home. And that's 125% increase. And that's not including, again, if you go in and they add a tool, then you add a shampoo and conditioner, and then you add a thermal protectant, which often happens. So this is how you can quickly increase with take home. With like 2 to 3 minutes, you've more than doubled your ticket in these conversations with your guests. And you guys, a lot of people, even if some of you have hangups about tools, one of the things I would say is that you literally can get it with like a shampoo, a conditioner, and a styler. Like that right out of the gate is $60, which is even more than that $40 ticket we have there. I just saw in the chat, someone asked, sorry, let me pop that up again. Do you have an analogy you could give to clients? Sometimes it's a real struggle to convince them. So yes, I can totally talk about this. And it is, thank you, Audra. It is as easy as having the conversation. So what I often will say to the guests, and we talked about consultation already, but for me, take home is a conversation that starts in the consultation. So whether I'm doing a perm on a guest, especially when I'm doing a blonding service on the guest, anytime there's color or chemicals involved, the take home conversation happens in the consultation. And I continue to, I'm gonna say, I was gonna say infect, but that might not be the PC term current given the current situation, but like, right, like, so that is the conversation that I have with the guests, so that I'm planting seeds is what I'm doing. That's a very like clean beauty friendly. So what I'm doing is I'm constantly planting seeds. So what I explain to my guests is, say in this scenario, we're taking them from brunette to this 15 to 20 foil placement. What I'll say to them is, listen, sometimes when you go through this lightening process, there is maintenance that's required. So you're now introducing chemicals into your service. So you are educating, I love that, Karen, thank you. You are educating your guests. We are educators, right? So whether you're on a platform, on a Zoom right now, like me and Colin are, whether you are traveling the world for a manufacturer, you behind the chair, every single day that you're behind the chair, are educating your guests. You are an educator. And so your knowledge, the time that you're spending here with us today, like that has a value attached to it. And what the reason we're giving this information is so that you can pay it forward and have more ease in those conversations with your guests. So let's dial it back. So if I'm in that consultation, I'll say to the guests, okay, so as we introduce these new chemicals into your hair, I'll talk to them a little bit about hair structure. To be honest, like I really give them all the information. I'm like, okay, so your hair is comprised of moisture, it's comprised of protein, it's comprised of something we call melanin, and I give them that full structure, the proteins, the carbohydrates, and I let them know that in this process, we're actually eating away at the natural melanin, we're replacing it with this beautiful artificial tone, and what we're also doing is we're removing proteins, we're removing moisture out of the hair. So once we remove it out, we have to make sure that we put it back in. So I will put it in today in the form of treatments, which we'll talk about, and in the products that I'm using. And also this is a co-creation. So as you go home, Your job is to make sure that you are maintaining this beautiful result that we've created today. And the way that you do that is to utilize the take-home products that I'm going to share with you. Now, the other conversation I have with my guests as well is I also let them know, like Colin said, that their maintenance at home actually dictates what's possible when they come see me again in the salon. So that's what's really, really key, is that if you actually, like, they need something on the line in order to motivate them, right, to utilize those products at home. Because it's great if they buy it, great, I have money in my pocket. But the reason we're actually introducing this concept of take home to the guest is so that they can make sure that their hair is as healthy as possible, so that we can do whatever it is they want to do. That's really the conversation there, is that we're both investing in this. My investment happens right now. You're sitting there, I'm going through and doing all these different techniques on you. And then when you go home, you have to maintain it. Colin, I see that you're ready to rock and roll. You're all set up. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what happened? We'll come back to the take home conversation in just a minute.
Yeah, so I'm just involved in the same great placement that you already did. And this is something that you want to make sure that you're having. Like, what happens is the guest goes from this beautiful kiss of color, right, where they have what they want, and eventually, if you just keep highlighting and keep going lighter and lighter and lighter, over the years they turn into this, you know, and it's never light enough. And you have that guest that's never light enough, no matter how blonde they are, it's never blonde enough. Well, what we want to do is make sure that we're adding depth back into the hair. So sometimes when that guest isn't blonde enough, it's just because they need a little depth put back in. You know, when I say depth, I'm not talking about making them brunette again. I'm talking about having a deeper tonality to make that blonde look brighter. So if your guest is 100% blonde all over, they have no depth throughout their hair, so they're never going to feel blonde enough. So when that guest is too blonde, believe it or not, all they need is some low lights. I'm also going to show you guys, this is the same technique, you know, that if you want that guest that wants to be a higher percentage blonde, but doesn't have the support to wear a full balayage, or wants a nice combination of the two, a foil placement with the balayage, this technique is how you would evolve it. So we took Paula's exact same placement. The only difference is now I'm going to hit that hairline. Most guests want to be lighter around the face, I feel. So, you know, it's just a really quick little balayage. So I'm going to do right around here. Just like Paula, I'm going to start towards the middle. And then I'm just going to start to hit this hairline up. I think a lot of hairdressers have a lot of fear when it comes to balayage and getting too close to the root. It's just don't oversaturate. That's really kind of the trick. And then don't be afraid to move that panel where they're actually going to pull their hair back. So, you know, I'm kind of over directing it, moving it, taking it off its base a little bit to see where it lives. Once that's fully lightened around that hairline, I'm going to go right in and now hit those edges up. I paint in between foils all day long. It's like that second visit done at the same time as the first. So I love to put my base in. And remember, I told you earlier, if you have a guest that can't support a full balayage, put those foil placements in and then just paint in between some of their edges that aren't in foil. They just want to see that lived in color towards the base. I mean, towards the edges and that depth at the base. So I'm working with these meshes today just because I'm able to just kind of place them right in. So I have my meshes, I have my foil, my painted in, and then I'm just gonna work that right in. Now, what I love to do is when I work with a light color, I love to put depth behind it. So I'm gonna show you guys, sometimes it's too blonde. Sometimes you wanna add some depth. So I'm just gonna place that foil right over top here. And then I'm gonna drop my next segment, my next section. And when I drop that next section, I'm gonna add some depth here. How do you do it? Well, you add some lowlights. Demi works great. I absolutely love working with a demi. So what I'm going to do is simply pull that hair back. This is a 8PA with a little drop of 7NB, and that's going to give me some depth at the root. So I'm going to paint that right in at that regrowth. And again, this is still blonde. We're just taking a little bit of that tone down. So I'm going to just kiss that up. And then once that's going here, I have 9NB, 9PA on the edges. So all I'm doing is taking that yellow, brassy, kind of lived-in blonde, and now just adding some depth to it. You can already see those colors are beautiful, they're meshing. Y'all know to cross-check, go across like this, right? That's spreading the hair and making sure we're saturated. Whether you're balayaging or low lighting, the key really is saturation. You could even hit a third color in through here if you want. You can feather it, leave it. This is where the artistic comes in. This is what the guest is really paying for with balayage. They're paying for your eye, your grace, your hand, your touch, your thoughts. And they're really paying for your depth, your ability to look at hair color, not just in lightness, but also in what am I putting behind it, what am I putting in front of it, how am I getting it to look there. That's what great colorists do. They work in subtleties, very, very subtle shades. Nothing really overpowers what we're doing here. They all kind of come together and blend. I'm going to continue this all the way throughout. And what we did through here, if you guys look, we shadow rooted her really with a very light level 8. You know what I mean? So she's still blonde, and then we put some foils in around the hairline, which I'll show you. But this is something I do all day long, or a variation of it. I'm either painting in between, and it could be something as toning with a 10 and painting in between a 9. It doesn't really have to be extravagant. Adding some 8-level lowlights, but I'm really using 3 colors at least, really to kind of add dimension into a blonde. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's just a little different. So you left that little triangle out in front, Paula, right? I'm just going to highlight and low light it.
I love it.
And then we would just shadow it all, and you'll get that end result that you see right over there.
I love that. And you actually brought up a really good point about like what their next visit looks like. And we have a slide that talks about our next business trip, or our next business tip, which is, I wish we were on a business trip. I know, right? We are. So the next thing there is talking about toners as a standalone service. So Colin mentioned like, hey, it might be as simple in this service to shift their dimensionality or shift what you're looking at, is actually bringing that guest in for a toner. It's interesting because Colin and I were having this conversation, and he was saying toner. For me, a toner is what happens when the guest is in the salon, like after a lightning service. But what is actually happening when the guest comes in, like maybe 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, maybe 6 weeks later, we're toning down whatever brassiness has shown up, whatever lightness has shown up, right? So that toner, especially with the demi, like it's got a 6 week shelf life if the guest is using take home, which is another tip that I use when I'm talking to my guests. The longer the better your products, the more I know what you're using, the more I can coach you along on the longevity of your color, which is another take home conversation I have. But what I do with my guests is I actually they're not going to come in and get this full lightener service every single time they come in, but in between their services, they'll come in for a refinement or a toner, not a redo. And so that's where when you start to look at these numbers again, excuse me, if the guest is coming in, they're getting a toning service, it's $85, might be less, might be more, depending on where you're at, what your pricing is. But what I want you to see again is here, if that guest comes in, say they're only coming in every, 3, 4, sometimes 6 months for a lightning service, you can actually supplement their services and increase your frequency of visit by having them come in for just a demi overall top coat. So in an $85 service, 2 times a year, that's an additional $160 in revenue. The more you pre-book that guest, the more you increase that, you can get up to, up to like $680 on an $85 service if they're coming in to see you, 8 times a year. Most of my guests, I try to get them in on a 3 to 4 week rebook. Just 1 second, I'll take a drink. So I try to see my guests on average, every 3 to 4 weeks. And it actually makes a really dynamic difference. And my guests come in and they might have a lower ticket they have a lower ticket, but over the life of, say, that year, I'm generating more revenue as a result. So it's a different way to adjust that works in a way that works for my guest budget. Excuse me. But also doesn't affect my revenue. So I'm still generating the revenue. I can adjust based on my guest budget, on their preferences. Also, I'm building guest loyalty, which ultimately is going to not only affect my frequency of visit, but then it also affects the longevity and guest retention, which is huge. It's something that a lot of hairdressers have a hard time with, guest retention. So this is, again, you can do what works for you. There's lots of different options, but I'm just telling you, for me, that's how I've actually been able to revamp my business, especially after COVID. I'm in Los Angeles, California. We were closed down for like essentially a year. And that has really been able to like supplement the revenue, is making sure that I'm really being diligent about my frequency of visit with my guests. Okay, let's go ahead and move, and we're going to talk about treatments. So let's go to the next slide. And this sits really similar to the conversation that we had before about take home. So the first line is that take home line, right? So I have an $85 service, $40 shampoo, conditioner style. If that's a 45% increase, $125. If I go into a treatment, which again, the numbers will vary. It might be $25, it might be $30, it might be $50, it might be $100, depending on your demographic. But what I want you to look at is the numbers here. So just by adding that one additional treatment, I have to condition my guest hair anyway. So why not, again, like we had that initial conversation, the consultation, I'm affecting the proteins, I'm affecting the moisture, the carbohydrates, the lipids that live in their hair. We want to put that back. So because I've educated them in the consultation about what we're taking out, the sale of a treatment isn't really a sale. It's very simple, and it's saying, hey, I'm going to actually recommend that we do this treatment. It's going to help really get your color and the integrity of your hair where we need it to be, especially if we have a longer term game plan. So then with that treatment, again, this is based on a $25 treatment. You're going from $85 to $65 shampoo conditioner treatment, $150, which is a 75% increase. So again, on this business side, it's really important to look at this and understand that no matter what your service is, you don't have to work as hard, and you can make a lot more money if you're willing to utilize that partnership with our amazing Paul Mitchell products and treatments for after behind the chair, in order to really maximize your end result. I saw a question in here. Give me this one. Oh, that's a really great question. I love Kimmy Nguyen said that what I found is I'm educating my guests about the products and tools. I'm not trying to sell them. Yes, 100%. That 100% is the game changer. It's the education, and it is the sales through education. Help them understand that they actually need it and why they need it. Because we're not selling. So someone asked, Colin, I don't know, do you ever use like a spray to control frizz and flyaways when you're doing?
Yes, I use Neuro Protect, just as a little bit of a, you have a rubber glove, you basically run that through hair, you're definitely creating static. Yeah. So to alleviate static, I personally use a little Neuro Protect. The lightener goes right through it, no issues, and that keeps the fly.
Yeah, and you can also use the other options you have, like you want something that's really lightweight, that's designed to control the flyaway. So NeuroProtect Spray Worked Up is another one that I really enjoy. If you're working with a guest that needs a little bit more, you could even use something like All Well Ginger option. And not also, if your guest is having static, that's the perfect conversation about introducing a treatment. Because the reason that static starts to happen is all of that friction, And so then that's where you start to get that halo of flyaways. And so you can introduce that to your guests like, hey, I'm gonna do treatment on you hair today. I cannot keep the tea tree lavender mint mineral hair masks in the salon. They absolutely are flying off the shelves because that's a really great take home option for my guests to maintain the integrity of their hair as they go through.
All right, so this technique's kind of quick and finished.
It's amazing.
You guys can see, I didn't fully paint everything yet, but really it's about using the real estate that you have available. Oftentimes you put the foils in and you say, oh my God, we're finished. Well, no, not necessarily. Do you want to balayage a couple of those in-between pieces that are left out? Do you want a low light? Do you want a shadow root? Utilizing that real estate is really, really important. And it really is a difference artistically as well. Again, for those guests that are never blonde enough, sometimes really what happens here, in order to be blonder, you need some depth put back into the hair. So it's just understanding these things. And I really got to sit, Paul. I had a great time planning this class with you because I know we both fit in the same wheelhouse. We're artistic, we love what we do, but we also have bills to pay, families to support, lifestyles, that we want to lead. And, it is important to have a business. And I learned from you right away that I didn't even think about looking at my take home and my treatments and tools as the ability of having a whole nother guest sit in my chair without having another guest sit in my chair. And that was a real light bulb for me to be able to learn that and understand. And I definitely took that back to my own salon and said, let's relook at things. The guest is getting what they need. It's not always win-win situations. The guest is getting what they need. They're purchasing products from me. I know we all know about the A word, Amazon, and things like that. We're all dealing with that. I leverage Amazon to better my business personally. But the one thing that you and I both said is that we have same day delivery, which is actually even better than Amazon. We have professional recommendation, which is super helpful. And if you really put a little bit of energy back there, the guests are gonna have a long, blonde, healthy hair that they want, the products they need to maintain to create that style. And that's going to create a lot more freedom and luxury in our lives, whether it's luxury with luxury items, if you're a Gucci gang member, or if it is just luxury with being able to sit in the dock of the bay with your kids, whatever that is, you can really get that and achieve that through blonding. And I believe in that heart and soul for sure. And it's something that we both really, really put a lot of time and energy into, and it shows you love back.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely shows you love back. And that's the thing too, is and also you guys acknowledge yourselves for taking time today to come here, have this conversation with us, ask your questions, contribute to each other. I saw you guys in the chat. I know I didn't call everybody out, but I saw you guys really including each other in these conversations about tips and tricks and what works for you in your business. And just know that there are so many, there are endless possibilities. And what Colin and I have shown you is here's one 15 to 20 foil to introduce chemical services to your guests. It's for that guest that's maybe normally just a haircut guest. They want something low maintenance. So that's the baseline. And then Colin showed you how to take that product, go to the next level with hand painting, balayage, putting in the depth and the dimension that the guest is looking for. And then also, like you said, I love that comparison of your super blonde girl with the one that has the depth in it. But this is, I love your side by, I'm calling out all the girls, but I love the side by side because really the brunette in Colin's hand is that's love, that's step one, right? So we can get that guest from the brunette all the way to the middle, right? Her middle beautiful blonde there in a few services. That's a lot of revenue. And we all know how to do that. What changes the game plan is to elevate things like take home, elevate your treatments, that's business, right? This is the artistry that we're talking about with the mannequins that we've worked through, and they have to work together in order for you to have a viable business. It's so, so important. So as we wrap up here, I want to talk about one of my favorite business tips, business tip number 5. Let's go ahead and pop that slide up really quickly. Colin, I love, we all know and love Colin for he's got the words, he's got the dialogue. And so I really am excited to wrap up with this conversation with you. So business tip 5 is pre-booking. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about because, like I said in the very beginning, there's a couple of reasons. One, initially, like when you're younger, you sometimes feel a little bit awkward about pre-booking, or the guests will give you back the reason they don't want to pre-book, and then you don't know what to say, and so you just are like, okay, well, give me a call when you're ready. For me, I knew early on that like that was not a viable business model for me. I wanted to control my own future. I didn't want to wait on my guests to dictate it for me. And so we're going to just quickly talk about why do guests not pre-book, what's the value of pre-booking, and what do you say to get a guest to pre-book?
Yeah, well, I mean, and most of my tips I've taken from other successful salons like Robert's Mirror Clean, letting the guests know when. And then my biggest tip though is to have that conversation up front, let the guests know that this is the recommended maintenance level. And one of the things I love to do to increase frequency of visit, again, why is that important? It means the guest is coming in between your normal visit. We all know balayage grows out, and guests grow out with it, and it looks better and better a lot of times. Sometimes I see my guests a month after I did it, that's what I wanted to look like when I originally did it. So I understand that people are having the luxury of not coming to the salon, but just because they're not coming in for their blonde doesn't mean they shouldn't be pre-booking their toner as things start to brass out, or pre-booking their conditioning treatments in between, or even breaking up that haircut, separating that haircut from that service. I feel like, I don't know about you, but a lot of times, most of my guests, I have those few that hunker down, bring their lunch, sit like, with their legs crossed on my chair and like, are just good to go there watching Netflix. Those are few and far between. Most of my guests aren't relaxed. They're there for a really long time. So I always tell them, break those services up, come in shorter, sweeter visits, keep your hair really healthy, get those toners in between services, and that helps a lot with people.
I love that. And I think that's the conversation. And again, I know we're like circling back, but this is like truly the master class of like, you already know how to do it. It's just about breaking up the things you already know and implementing them in ways that are actually viable for your business. So the thing about the pre-booking is, yes, breaking up into smaller and including it in the consultation. Have that conversation with your guests. Like Colin said when he was talking initially at the beginning of class, like, so, this is going to take you 4 visits to get from point A to point B. And so we're going to actually pre-book all of those services before you leave today. So you're already setting that expectation, and the guest knows. I've had guests say to me like, oh, I don't know where I'm going to be in 6 weeks. And I'm like, well, if we schedule your hair appointment, you'll know where you're going to be in 6 weeks. Right. And like letting it be this levity. And I will tell you more often than not, like I've had guests that, they would not pre-book. And then I just couldn't get them in. And I would let them know like, hey, sorry, I'm not available. And they learn real fast that like pre-booking is the way to get them in. So the other thing that I always say as just like a little tip for you guys, this might work, take it, maybe don't, whatever works for you. I let my guests know, hey, we can pre-book this. It might be 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks out. If we need to change it, we can change it, but it's better to have it and be able to move it than not have it and be trying to squeezing in. Like that is, because I won't squeeze my guests in. It's just that's not part of my guest service experience. Like I want to make sure that my guests that have pre-booked, they're rewarded. They get my attention. I'm not stressed out. Like, so the squeezing in generally doesn't happen for me. And so my guests learn that, and I communicate that with them so that they know that what the expectations are, right? So pre-book, if it's better to have it. If we need to shift it, we absolutely can. I would rather be flexible and shift my timeline and maybe pull a guest out or push her back a week or him back a week than trying to cram somebody in. It's just not, it's going to make me stressed out. So either way, one of us is stressed. The other thing too is I like to know that I'm going to have money in 6 weeks, right? So that for me as a hairdresser, like I don't worry about the money piece of it because I know like I'm going to have money. My guests are in here, they're ready to rock and roll. So I think that's it. Like I love that conversation.
We're either making money or we're spending it. That's what I say. So if I don't have any clients, I'm out spending money somewhere.
Totally.
So I think it's really important. But it's been an amazing class with you. I'm glad that we're together.
Totally.
I'm really thankful that each one of you all joined us to learn a little bit today about how to be successful through blonding. And this is something, like I said, we really take seriously at Jump Home Systems. We really want to help you guys with that technique. Paula, thank you for that amazing technique. I hope you use it. 15 to 20 coils. I mean, come on. That is really great. And then just to upgrade it, think about it differently, think about depth, think about adding brightness, think about the time frame you have, and try to be really realistic as an artist. It's about taking a bunch of different skill sets you have and combining them into, you know, what best way we can make the guest as happy as possible and realistically as possible to achieve their greatest expectations and kind of get that going. So
I love that.
I enjoyed today.
Thanks, me too.